and I'll introduce Yvonne now. Yvonne Cha is the editorial assistant at the Grove Atlantic. She has a very impressive resume, right? Graduate of Brown University and in the literary arts, and then went off to go get her MFA in fiction at the notorious, the infamous, I don't know, there's a lot of adjectives to describe the Iowa's Writers Workshop at the University of Iowa. It is one of the most impressive and important MFA programs in the country and around the world. And so she's a graduate there. Went on to become an editorial intern at the New York Times. Also served did some work for the International Justice for Mission. Some of you guys might be familiar with IJM and their work on human trafficking issues around the world and global poverty and other initiatives. And she's also worked as a visiting assistant professor at the University of Iowa as well. And so I think all of these wonderful experiences, she knows she was a student just like all of you were, right? Trying to figure out her career path. And it's something that in my friendship with Yvonne, we've had conversations about where all this will lead. And, you know, one of the things that we know is that uh, whatever season you're in, it's not the last one. God has bigger plans and purposes for us. And, many of you have heard me talk about my countdown to my 50th birthday, right? I say it all the time. And I think when you have that kind of perspective, you look at every experience as preparation, right? And so whatever stage you're in, whatever brought you to this conversation, just know that it's all preparation for what God has planned for you. And so I think we're very fortunate to have Yvonne join us today and share her story a little bit. And before we get to the questions, I gave a list of questions to Yvonne that we'll go through, and then we'll open it up for your Q&A a little bit here. We have others who texted me questions. They're like, I can't believe I can't make it, right? And people were really interested, Eunice Hahn and others who really wanted to be here but couldn't. So Yvonne, why don't you, anything you want to share about yourself that I didn't cover first before we get to the questions?
I think you covered it more than I even can recall. Thank you so much for the introduction. It's so great to be here, and it's also so exciting just because I I think a lot of people aren't aware of the publishing industry as a viable career option, and so being able to spread the word and also finding the intersections between publishing and different majors, different fields of study. It's just ripe with possibilities, career opportunities, and absolutely, like Professor said, like you just never know which doors will open depending on the conversations you're engaged in. So, yeah, thank you so much for having me. I can't wait to hear about your experiences as well.
All right. Well, let's go ahead and get to the questions. Number one, tell us about Grove Atlantic, first of all, right? Where you work currently.
Yeah, so Grove Atlantic is one of the oldest and I would say the biggest independent literary publishing house currently in America, alongside maybe Grey Wolf and Norton, two also prestigious literary houses in the publishing landscape. Grove Atlantic has a really exciting legacy of supporting a backlist of radical writers like Franz Fanon. I don't know if you saw on that screen of Grove Atlantic. So radical writers who, Kathy Acker, I don't know if you've heard of her, but writers who really pushed the bounds of genre, who spoke out against the political movements that were happening during their time periods. And so we boast a really strong backlist of writers like classical writers like Samuel Beckett or the playwright Harold Pinter. Along with our backlist, though, we have contemporary literary fiction writers and nonfiction writers as well. And Grove Atlantic currently is comprised of 4 senior editors, and each senior editor is almost responsible for a niche or a pocket in the literary market. You can almost think of them as like Harry Potter houses, right? So, like, one senior editor kind of represents international fiction and will be the ones to scout books that are translated from different languages and see if there is a place for those translated texts within the US book market. Grove Atlantic also has a branch in the UK, so we have a really strong relationship with writers there, and we're always trying to find new opportunities to support writers that might not have a spotlight um, at the major houses. So being an independent house, Grove Atlantic is not a huge behemoth like Penguin Random House, where we have tons of money to buy all of the commercial upmarket literary fiction. So we're kind of like the underdog, but our work really speaks for itself. So some of our most recent or some of our most esteemed writers currently are Viet Nguyen, who wrote The Sympathizer and The Committed, Writers and Lovers by Lily King, Kai Miller's essay collection, Things I Have Withheld, and Rabi Alameddin's most recent novel, Wrong End of the Telescope. And Rabi Alameddin was a finalist for the National Book Award. So our writers are very accomplished, they're literary, and we really devote all of our resources, pretty much all of our time, into making sure we sustain their careers long term, right? It's not just about making a quick buck off of a commercial piece of literature, but really contributing to the American Academy of Letters. Um,
That's great. One question just really quick is just what does it mean to be an independent press, right? And you've already kind of alluded a little bit to the difference between like Penguin and Grove Atlantic. Apart from the literary, right, achievements and reputation of the types of books that Grove Atlantic publishes, like what makes a publishing house independent?
so I think because Penguin Random House is such a systemic corporate structure, there's a really hierarchical or bureaucratic way of going about publishing or editing a book. Grove Atlantic is a lot more flexible. We're not held to the same sort of standards of doing a P&L, or if a book doesn't sell, we don't necessarily drop an author, right? There's just a lot more autonomy in how we interact and engage with our writers and their work, pretty
So
much.
less of a corporate profit-driven model and more, right? How do we cultivate the arts, right? And
Absolutely.
yeah,
But
good.
it's always, I mean, of course, it still is a business. And
Yeah,
so what we say is, how do we find this sweet spot of making sure it is lucrative to a certain extent, but still upholding a standard of literary greatness, I guess.
great. Tell us about your role there. What is an editorial assistant and how did you get into that?
So, as you mentioned, I got my MFA in fiction writing, and I very much still to this day, my dream is to become a writer. But I think there was something that didn't sit well with me when I thought about the process of turning writing into a book, right? The process of materializing a piece of writing into a tangible object and how that object interacts with a market. Because when you write something, you are writing for an audience, and how you reach that audience is contingent on how that book is marketed and presented and packaged to the world. And as I was thinking about that process, I thought, okay, I want to learn a trade. And I think the best way to start is as an editorial assistant. My job, because we're an independent house, we are smaller, and that means I get to wear a lot of hats. There are multiple processes to a book becoming a book. The first is that a book is submitted to us through an agent. I'm the first one to read those submissions. Once I read a submission that I really like, I then collaborate with other editors in our house and ask, would you guys also be interested in working on this book? Or do we feel that this book is compatible with Grove's aesthetic? Once, we have multiple editors on board, we then bid on the book. That's also a process that I am a part of. So when we bid on a book, we propose a contract. We consider rights. So a book is sold to us, and we can have North American rights or we can have world rights, right? So some math goes into that process, and it's a lot of paperwork as well. I oversee contracts, I oversee rights memos, for serial, all these things. And then once we have the rights to the book, and that book has contractually become a Grove book, we then go ahead into edits. As an editorial assistant, I will take the first or second edit on a book, which means I will be the first person to kind of go through the entire manuscript, make structural edits, line edits. This goes through 3 or 4 rounds, depending on what shape the book is in. And once the book is in copy editing, we pass it over to the production team, and the editorial assistant will be in charge of making sure that the manuscript is meeting all of its deadlines. So in order for a book to be published, it takes a year cycle, right? From the minute it's purchased to the minute it's in bookstores, it's generally 9 months to a year. If it's 9 months, we call it a crash. And you just oversee that process. So you are dealing with graphic designers, people who are designing our book jackets, making sure our author knows what stage our book is in. And the most, I think, collaborative part of it is that as an editorial assistant, you're supposed to cultivate good relationships with other writers out there so that when your book is being primed for publication, you gather blurbs. So you send out galleys and you ask other writers, hey, if you're interested in this book, would you write us a blurb? So we can use that for promotional material. And yeah, so that's pretty much, like, you really do get to see from A to Z every component, I mean, of that process. And there's just also a lot of communication with authors and agents and making sure you um, let your tastes be known so that agents know what to send you when they're submitting manuscripts.
Well, I hope you're keeping like a journal of, just collecting stories because I bet you've got some great stories to tell about working with authors, about the different kinds of experience and personalities you've encountered over the years, and
Yeah.
right, things that have gone horribly wrong and things have gone unexpectedly right. And so that itself, right, I think I feel like there's like a market for those types of books more and more
It's
now.
I think with COVID, having to work with our writers online, we had a lot of middle career authors who had never used Adobe before, didn't
Yeah.
know how to edit a PDF, and so I was editing Ricky Lee Jones's memoir, Last Chance Texaco, and I had to Zoom her 8 hours a day every day for an entire summer, just going line by line through every single word in her 400-page memoir. Lots of tears were shed. I mean, I think it's a really tedious job, and there's not a lot of room for error. I mean, grammar is syntax, grammar, any of that. It's ruthless. So I would say that you do kind of have to be on the more meticulous and organized end.
That's helpful. Yvonne, you've already kind of said a little bit about how your role fits in with other roles in the publishing world. Are there other larger entities, right? You said something about the senior editor, their role, things like that. But what are some of the other possibilities? You talked about graphic designers, and are there other roles that we should be thinking about when we imagine publishing?
Absolutely. I think publishing is always a conversation between agents, who are the first ones who get to see a manuscript, right? Agents will pretty much scout authors and try
So tell
to.
us a little bit about that, right? What is an agent? Because we all know about agents from, TV shows or things like that. But like what is an agent and what is their role? Why do they exist, right, in the publishing world?
Absolutely, that's a really great question.
Yeah.
So agents are part of agencies, larger entities that represent authors. Oftentimes, agents will go to MFA programs or go to writers' workshops and try to scout writers and find the ones that they want to work with. Otherwise, you can go to their website and actually submit their manuscript and say, "I'm interested in being represented by you based on the list of books that they've previously represented." They'll send you a rejection letter if they don't like you. If they do, that's when you get to work with that agent, and they pretty much help you gauge whether or not your manuscript is in the shape that it needs to be in order to be submitted to publishing houses. Publishing houses will almost never accept an unsolicited manuscript. So if you want your manuscript to be read, your best bet is to have an agent who has a relationship with editors in different houses, because those are the ones that editors are most likely to read sooner, right? And you always have to go with an editorial assistant like me, who's prioritizing which submissions to read based on the caliber of the agent who sends that work.
Yeah.
So it definitely is sort of like this. Um, there is a competitive edge to it, right? Like, you want to have a competitive agent, and that agent is also known for their ability to negotiate um, the cost of your book, right? So if you have a good agent, that agent will find a way to get your book the best possible offer. A good agent can get you $600,000 for one novel versus a poor agent who can get you 30,000, right? It really is about having an agent who understands the marketplace and knows how to sell your book in relation uh, to other editors' interests and what they're looking for, and what's popular right now. Um, That being said, the agent does not take any money until your book is sold. And then once your book is sold, they will take a commission of, either 10 to 15% of, um, we call it the money that you get when you first sell the book. So yeah, that is an agent.
Yeah.
Um,
I bet
and
there's a whole separate conversation we could have, right, about agents and with agents and that whole experience. Let's come back to your world and your part in terms of some of the other roles that we should be thinking about besides agents. Yeah.
So outside of agents, within the publishing house, you have the editorial team who they're the first ones to see a manuscript, but once a manuscript is, we offer an advance and it becomes ours. The production team is basically the team that is the liaison between the manufacturer, right, the printers who are actually printing the physical books, and making sure the manuscript is formatted and designed and organized in a way that's optimal for printing. The production side of things is a lot more logistical, right? There are a lot more time management. It's very scheduled, right? They pretty much have to constantly be in communication with copy editors and proofreaders who we outsource. So we don't do that as an editorial team, right? Because that's a lot of labor and time. Um, and then aside from the production team also works with the design team. They are the ones designing books. And that's not just books. We design promotional materials, right? So if an author's on a book tour and we need posters, our art team will do that. And then we've got marketing and publicity. So we've got people who, once the book is ready to come out, sending out uh, promotional material and submitting the book for awards and competitions and making sure the book is visible to all the right people. So marketing and publicity, they have really good contacts with publications like the New York Times or the Atlantic or the New Yorker, asking for reviews, asking for the book to have some sort of coverage. And then the final sort of house or head section is the sales team. And the sales team does a lot of work with independent booksellers, with book conferences, with AWP, the Writers Conference. We make sure our books are, we have relationships with sales reps from major sales outlets, right? Like Amazon or Barnes and Nobles, even Hudson, the airport booksellers. We pretty much just have to stay on top of our relationship with all of our booksellers, of the people who, selling our books are their bread and butter. And we couldn't do what we do without them, and how by word of mouth they really advocate for our works. So yeah, those are like the general
Yeah.
sections of publishing, I would say.
Yeah, like different departments, the larger team that makes up Grove Atlantic. And it kind of makes me think of all the work that you all are doing as tutors for the Writing Center. You didn't know, but you were, you having to do promotional material, right, for events and copy editing and all kinds of things that you've had to do for me. So thank you. That's so helpful. You've already kind of alluded to this as well, but like what would a typical career path in publishing look like? I'm not sure, and I think when I asked you this question, I put typical in like stars because I'm not sure if there is such a thing as a typical path. I don't know if anybody sets out to be like an editor or, to make a career out of publishing. But as more and more people are thinking about this as a viable option, what would that story look like?
That's a really great question. I think that's one that I'm constantly rediscovering in my personal career pursuits. I think traditionally it depends on what kind of house you're in. I have to admit, these jobs are very, very competitive. And once someone gets their foot stuck in the door, they are not willing to relinquish that spot. And I will also tell you, because it's so competitive, because people are so overqualified for these entry-level jobs, the pay is extremely low. And there is a reckoning coming for the publishing industry because they're entry-level jobs are not livable wages. I just being upfront with you, an editorial assistant in their first year will make $38,000 a year, right? And the publishing industry is heavily, heavily based in New York City. Living in New York City on $38,000 a year, very, very difficult, right? So right off the bat, I think the traditional career path is one of paying your dues in a way that might not make sense to a lot of people. Once you've sort of established to the gatekeepers of the industry that you're in it for the long haul, um, the first step to that traditional career path is like sticking it out in editorial until you are given the trust and the access to buy your first book. So, as an editorial assistant, I'm an assistant editor to books that are bought by the senior editors. But once I've paid my dues, I guess I'm given one chance to buy my book. That pretty much I've put all of my eggs in this one book. And if that book sells or takes off in a way that feels compatible with the trajectory of our house, that's when you move up to associate editor and then senior editor, and hopefully, you have established your career as pretty much a fellow gatekeeper in the world of publishing. Oftentimes this is really a waiting game. I know my friends who are editorial assistants in bigger publishing houses have been assistants for 5 to 7 years before they're given that opportunity. It really depends because editors are not willing to give up their precious, spots on their list every season.
Mm.
And that's why I think there's a lot of crossover between agenting and editorial work, right? So people
Yeah.
who can't stick it out choose to move on to the agenting world or the scouting world, or move on to different departments. I would say production is a little bit less competitive. Um, and you also have to be wary. The biggest, I think, misconception people have is, oh, I like to read, I like to write. Obviously, I will love being an editor. And that's often not the case. In fact, I am inundated with reading other people's writing that I often don't have time for my own writing. And it also jades you, right? Because as you're reading, it's no longer for enjoyment. You're constantly assessing whether or not this book is right for the market, right? And once art becomes commodified, it almost sucks the beauty out of it. And so you really have to brace yourself whether or not you are willing to give up the time that you would spend on your art to support other people's art. It's a really humbling experience. And so I can't tell you specifically there's one conventional career path, but if your dream is to be an editor, it really is just sticking it out and establishing trust within your community so that they might give you the chance to buy your book, and then from there you set off.
So this is not like a government job, in other words, right? Where after every couple years you'll move up a step and get, expect that 5% pay bump, right? Every year, and here's the track that you're on, so that by the time you get to retirement and pension, right? You get your pension and here you go, right? Kind of a thing. It sounds like there's a lot of sacrifice. There's a lot of sometimes even luck involved, right? And sometimes arbitrary chances, whether or not you end up choosing the right kind of book to buy, and there's it seems like so many variables outside of any one person's control. So, in order to sustain a career like that, what are the virtues, maybe perhaps the vices, right? What are the talents and the skills that are required for somebody to be successful in the publishing world?
Well, I think allyship and finding people within the community who also have the similar long-term goals for your industry as you do. So I have a really strong network of fellow editors, assistant editors who want to see a change in how writers are represented in the publishing industry. And those people are the ones who support and sustain my faith that the publishing industry has room for growth, has room for change, right? And that firm conviction, that foundational belief in what publishing means in the larger conversation of, justice and education and awareness, right? Like we are not just putting books out there and dusting our hands off. We're asking for these books to make an impact in people's lives. So having that long-term understanding of what your work means in the larger conversation or the larger sphere that you want to influence, that really has to be your backbone, because you will not be immediately gratified in your everyday workflow. In fact, you will forget how gratifying the process is at all.
Yeah.
And so the first, I think, is just humility and patience and understanding that like you there is no shortcut, right? And a lot of the time the work is thankless. Like a book will go on to win the National Book Award and the author will blow up, but the editor, we are not commission based, right? A book might sell 1 million copies, but that money is not seen by us. And so knowing what motivates you and knowing why you want to be in this industry, I think is the very first step. And then I think the second is being incredibly organized, incredibly precise, meticulous. Writing copy is a privilege because people get to read what you are writing, but that means every sentence has to be pristine. You just have to be incredibly creative, but also concise and articulate in how you present your books, their copy. So that would be the second. Um, and open-endedness. I think as an editor, you are not just reading and writing, you are cultivating relationships with people. And you just have to network and you have to know what books are out there, what writers are going to blow up in the next few months, having a pulse on the market. It's a really social aspect of the job, right? There are literary parties and readings and all of these things. And these are the things that you're doing outside of work that contribute to your work the most. So yeah, it's a lot to juggle.
I'm tempted to ask you to tell some stories about some of the parties you've been in, but well, maybe we'll get to that if we have time,
Yeah.
because that too I can imagine is a whole different kind of experience, right? Being in New York and these types of events and stuff. Um, Great. One last question, and then we'll open it up. Let's say we have somebody who's getting ready to apply for a position at that entry level position.
Mhm.
Maybe perhaps they've even locked down an interview. What would be the best way for them to even just like how do you prepare to apply for a position? How do you prepare for an interview? What are some of the tricks, maybe that insider trick that you would reveal that you would say, here's what somebody might be looking for in an application, in a cover letter, or at the interview stage?
I think every house, I think in any job, your company, the company that you're applying to, wants to feel seen and that you understand what the company's mission is. So for Grove, it's really important that you are familiar with our list, that you understand what the Grove aesthetic is, and you can speak to what Grove might be looking for as they're reading submissions, right? So just really familiarizing yourself with an editor's titles and making sure your personal tastes align with your editors so that it feels like you guys can support each other in the same mission. And I would say also the other thing is not being so limited to one genre. I think when I came into this role, I was like, I'm only working with literary fiction, but I have had to extend my knowledge into nonfiction, um, into into types of fiction that I would normally not be comfortable with. So making sure that you are flexible, but you still have a very firm understanding of what you like and what the house wants, and that you can speak to that, I think is definitely something that's helpful. And I always say the second is writing copy. I think even more so than what your cover letter says, it's how you write that cover letter and it's how you respond to um, the assignment they will most likely give you if you were to pass the interview. So I went through 4 stages of my interview. I had my first call, then my second call was to write copy for a manuscript. So I had to write copy for a book. And
What does that mean?
so descriptive copy. I can actually show you. It's the back of a book will have descriptive copy. They will ask you to write descriptive copy for a book that would then be used on the back of a paperback, which is extremely nerve-wracking, right? But
Ah,
what I would recommend you do then is just read as many paperback copies that you can find, even on Amazon. They're there if you look up a title of a book by
yeah.
that, um, and just familiarize yourself with that kind of voice, with that kind of sentence structure. And then the second assignment they made me do after I wrote that copy was to write a long form summary of a book. And that's when you write a long form summary of every chapter of a book and then assess whether or not this book is ready for publication, what you think its strengths are, where you think there might be narrative holes. It's kind of like doing a book report, but doing it in a way that's quick and efficient for other people in the house who have not read the book to get a gist of what it's about and whether or not they should consider buying it. Yeah.
That's extremely helpful. That's extremely helpful. I think that already, my guess is we've all learned so much more about the industry than it's one thing to, as when you're working on your creative projects, to romanticize, right? To fantasize about where the book goes, right? And then next thing, but you don't see it. You just write the book, and then you imagine it's on the bestseller list, right? It's on Barnes and Noble's top 10 or whatever it is. And it's important to be able to really imagine all the steps in between, how complicated it is, and how many people are involved in kind of delivering that baby, right? That creative project. And so helpful.
It,
All right.
I would say the timing is incredibly important too, right? Because your book is not, you can't assume that your book is going to be the center of the world when it comes out. You know, the books that were published during the pandemic, they did not get the kind of coverage they normally would have gotten because the world has bigger fish to fry.
Yeah.
As a publisher, that's incredibly challenging because we still have to position it to be relevant. Um, but we also can't insist. All we can do is hope. And so I think there is a lot of luck involved, which makes it as exciting as it is nerve-wracking. And that's the beauty of, I think, any job, really.
Oh, I'm gonna write that down. We can't insist, but we can hope. I feel like I can use that line for a sermon or just for my own personal devotion and reflection these days. Can't
Yes.
insist, but we can hope. I like that. That's so good. Thank you, Yvonne. Well, let's go ahead and open it up to some of your questions. Anybody have any other questions to ask Yvonne? Ahmed? There you
Okay,
go.
all right. Okay. So I was trying to ask, since the COVID pandemic, how does basically publication work nowadays? Because I'm assuming that a lot of people are going out less, they're purchasing less books. So, like, as a publication company, are you guys solidly like print book, or is it more like ebook? Because I don't remember last time I bought a book. I usually buy it on Amazon Kindle, or I
Yeah.
buy it from like e-textbook stuff.
Mhm. Yeah, that's a great question. We have seen an uptick in our ebook sales. I do think that market is becoming bigger as well as audiobooks. We are selling a lot more audiobooks than we normally did. But interestingly enough, the pandemic has actually increased sales for books overall. I think more people are reading or finding that it's important to be educated. Our country clearly had a socio-political reckoning this past year and a half. And so that's really kind of incentivized people to be informed and to read. So, and the prevalence of book clubs too. I think a lot of celebrities these days, Emma Roberts or Reese Witherspoon, they are promoting these huge book clubs. And so books are actually selling at higher rates than before. But I do see that ebooks and audiobooks are kind of having a resurgence due to COVID. And I do think we're trying to figure out how to print less because, or print in more efficient ways because there's a huge uh, manufacturing shortage in every industry across America right now because of the pandemic. For us to import paper or to import books from China, it's taking months and months. We are having huge delays in the printing of books because there's a labor shortage worldwide, and our industry is not spared that. So, bye, Allison. Uh, yeah, I hope that answers your question.
That is very interesting. And yeah, I mean, this is the case for every industry, like you mentioned. Everybody's trying to now figure out what the industry will look like moving forward, right? And yeah, it's good. Other questions?
I feel like, sorry, I feel like you've touched on it a little bit already, but I would just love to know what your favorite part of your job is and like what it is that keeps you going in the industry.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think when a book what resonates with me to the extent where I cannot wait for the world to read it, and I see that this book has the potential to touch the hearts of readers. I think it's funny because this is the first book that I worked on. It's called Crooked Hallelujah by Kelly Jo Ford. Um, it's an intergenerational tale of a mother and a daughter. Her mother is raised in a really traditional or conservative Christian household, but they're also native, so they live on a reservation, and it's just their relationship evolving over the generations. This book spoke to my heart, and when it did, I felt like, oh my gosh, like I can't. I just need to support this book. I just need to make sure that other people see it and read it and feel moved by it. And I think it's really just that soul like wrenching love for the text when you really are like shedding tears at your desk and you can't imagine like not working on it is like when you feel like, okay, this is worth it. Like, even if no one knows my name, as long as this book is out there, I'm good. I'm grateful that I get to be a part of it. Um, and it's happened to me a few times, but it's definitely challenging because what you might love, other people might not. And at the onset of your career, it's really hard to convince people to trust your taste. But those very rare moments when your tastes align with what you get to work on, it's like fireworks. So yeah.
Oh, that word taste, it's so both problematic and mysterious, and like you said, just absolutely exhilarating when things do align the way they do. And so that's interesting. Did you write the back cover of that?
I did. Yeah, I
Would
wrote the
you?
back. I wrote the readers group guide. This is like something that is also a part of publishing, so you'll write questions for
Yeah.
discussion at the end of the book
Yes.
for readers to work with. And yeah, another book that I recently worked on was just adapted for UC Santa Cruz's um, curriculum. So that's also incredibly rewarding when your book is a mandatory
Yeah.
text for an entire university.
Would you mind reading the back cover, what you wrote for that memoir? I just would love to just even hear you read your own writing. I mean, how often you don't know who wrote those things, and we have an opportunity for the author to read. So
Yeah, it's really short. It's 1974 in the Cherokee Nation of Oklahoma, and 15-year-old Justine grows up stifled by her mother's fierce religiosity. Though she does her best as a devoted daughter, an act of violence soon sends her on a different path forever. In lush and emphatic prose, Kelly Jo Ford depicts what 4 generations of Cherokee women will sacrifice for those they love, amid larger questions of history, religion, class, and culture. This is a big-hearted and ambitious debut of the powerful bonds between mothers and daughters by an exquisite and rare new talent.
beautiful. Makes me want to pick up a copy.
Absolutely, I will mail you one. It's such a good book.
It's that's such a skill right there, right? And something that is so how do you summarize a book? How do you entice somebody without spoiling, right? I mean, the spoiler alerts, situation that we're all now familiar with. How do we talk about Squid Game without like revealing some episode or, some major spoiler? And
Yeah.
it's one of those skills that is so necessary in the way that we talk about creative projects. And so that's fantastic.
I'm sure you guys hear the phrase kill your darlings. Just you got to cut the fat. It's always, and you have so many people whose eyes also, are contributing to the editing and the revising of this copy. People will just cut, whittle away until you've got just the bones, and that's more than enough. I think as an aspiring writer, you're always just like wanting to kind of embellish, but man, it hurts your pride a little at first. I will admit, but it is an invaluable skill to have. I would agree. Yeah.
Any other questions, Ben?
So I imagine this is going to change a lot based there's probably no one clear answer to this, but how much would you say that a book is changed between when it comes in and when the editorial team is done with it?
Yeah, so I say that that process is three-pronged. The first is when you have an agent, your agent will tell you what shape it's in, and you can work with your agent on a book for years before it's even seen by an editor. Most recently, my friend worked on his novel for 2 years with his agent before it was submitted to our house. And then, depending on the shape that it's in, some books we just don't edit. We will do really the bare minimum. We'll just clean up lines. And that can range from like a month to most recently Sarah Broom's The Yellow House, which won the National Book Award for nonfiction, published last year. That book took 7 years, because sometimes you buy a book as a partial and it's not even done yet. And you just have to take a leap of faith and hope the writer will deliver and they will push back their deadlines. And it's hard to keep them on track. Um, so it will vary widely. But once you get to your editor and your editor says this is okay and it goes into copy editing, you can expect for it to be out in 6 months, 6 to 9 months. But we will change lines, endings to books at the till the very last minute, Writers and Lovers by Lily King, like we took out an entire section at the last minute, rearranged some things, and it was like the best part of the book. And everyone was like, oh, we're so glad we changed that last minute. So it really depends. And authors also have the right to say, I don't want to make that edit. I don't want to make that change. And you can't really say a lot. Editors really are more like cheerleaders, right? Look, we want authors to feel supported in their artistic vision. We are not there to be their teachers or, tell them what to fix and what makes it better. It's like, what do you want it to be and how can we support you in making it that? And we give them sensitivity reads too. So, any blind spots they might have, those things are accounted for. So yeah, to answer your question, it really depends. I would say a year to upwards of 10.
And then years later, you have literary scholars like me that will search through your emails and letters and the back and forth between editors and authors and write an entire article, right, based upon that exchange. And next month I'll be presenting at a conference about precisely this issue with a writer named Younghill Kang, whose editor was also Fitzgerald's editor and things like that, and really pushed hard for a certain version of the ending to his novel, and the author completely resisted and went this other way. And till now, scholars are still debating the significance of that choice, the coherence of that choice. And many people have kind of made the argument that it actually is a very incoherent and ambiguous ending, right?
Mhm.
That probably affected things, everything from like sales to these types of things, because editors may or may not have other interests in mind, right? Readers and sales and these things, whereas an artist has just the interest of the art in mind. So
Mhm.
good. Any other questions, Jenna?
I guess my biggest question would be, how did you know you wanted to do this job? Like, when did you know that this was what you wanted to do, you know?
I still have to ask myself that question every day. It's a constant battle, but I think when I was at Iowa, I saw my friends selling their books for $500,000. And I was like, what in the world, right? Like, where is this money coming from? Who makes those decisions? And once I started at Grove and I saw just the passion that goes behind seeing a book become a book, I was like, okay, this feels gratifying to me. But I will also admit, I started my job when I was 23, 24. Like I could not have known. And I think even to this day, I have to make sure that I am not insisting that this is the only thing I can do with my life, right? Because God, like, he works in mysterious ways. And like 20 years from now, I might not be in publishing, but I think I'm just trusting that I'm learning something by being here. And that's enough to sustain me. But to answer your question, it's like when you see the book and you see your name in the acknowledgments and you're like, hell yeah, I made this happen. That definitely keeps me going.
Absolutely, right. Somebody who wasn't here asked me to ask the question about work-life balance, and you've kind of alluded to that a little bit, right? About the pay scale, especially at the beginning of a career and things like that. Anything else to say about work-life balance?
I will
Is there
say
such a thing, all right? Or
there is so much reading involved. I think reading for a class is one thing, right? But this is like if you are reading 2 to 3 submissions a day, that can be 200 pages. Sometimes I'll read 100 pages a day. I mean, it depends, right? Like if you read the first 50 pages of a manuscript and you're like, ugh, this isn't gonna work, you can move on. But sometimes you read an entire manuscript of 300, 400 pages, and you're like, I don't know. Like, is this good? Is this bad? And this is not while you're working. This is off work hours, right? So it's really hard. I mean, because the submissions they pile up, especially during like certain seasons, like the fall right now, right after Labor Day, they will pour in and you are spending nights reading hundreds and hundreds of pages of manuscripts you don't even know if you're going to buy. And you're like, is this a waste of my time? But there's no way to know until you've read it. And so I think that's the really painstaking part of the process, but you have to dig in order to find the one. So it pays off arguably. But I would say that's the hardest part of the work-life balance. It's like, when do you stop reading? And when do you not kick yourself in the head? For instance, Patricia Engel's Infinite Country was on submission to us, and I was in charge of reading the manuscript. I was like on the fence about it, and I think my senior editor and I agreed we're not going to publish it. But then it went on to become a New York Times bestseller, and we were like, oh my gosh, is that our fault? Did we make a huge mistake? And you can't think about it that way because at the end of the day, you can only do so much. You focus on the wins and not, you know, the things that appear to be losses. Um, so yeah, it's hard. Work-life balance is hard. But sometimes when you find that manuscript that's so good, you can't stop reading. So when you're like, man, I love my job.
and then I'm sure there's experiences where you're like, I love this. I think we should publish it. And your senior editor's like, nah, doesn't work for me, or something like that. And then yeah, I'm sure those conflicts also happen as well.
I am a I am a woman of color in a publishing house that's predominantly white and middle-aged. So there is a lot of that. I love divergent voices, experimental voices, voices that work with bilingualism or transliteration. And those are the books that our bosses are always the most uncomfortable with because they feel like they're not familiar with those kinds of voices to like properly represent them. And I kind of have to be like, well, there's no harm in trying, but there is harm in trying because everything is based on P&Ls and whether or not we'll profit off of it. So yeah, that's that's also really hard. But you do have small wins. So there was one book that was on submission that was in Korean, and I got to read the book in Korean before it was translated. And I really fought hard for that book, and we did buy it. And it's coming out this month. So it's called Love in the Big City by Sang Young Park. And it's written by a Korean queer writer about finding love in the big city. It's quite good. So
Ahmed, you had a question, you raised your hand? Yeah.
Yeah, I had a question. So do you guys strictly like do as in like fiction, and you said you also do nonfiction, but like what about other academic writing, like medical publications or scientific journals or any of those things that your publication does?
So Grove doesn't, but Norton is a big house that does that. HarperCollins also has an academic publishing um, leg. Uh, Different houses have different resources. So like Macmillan is a big academic publisher. They will only do that kind of literary journal stuff. I'm not too familiar with that side of publishing. I think academic journals are specific to publications and their mastheads. So those editors aren't affiliated with the house, they're affiliated with the publication. So like a journal or a magazine is very different from a publishing house where we um, publish individual books versus like articles that are featured in magazines.
Yeah, and I'm sure that's different. There's also unique features of university presses, right? That have a different structure and what it is that they're looking for too.
So a lot of university presses aren't affiliated with the universities themselves. They're
Yeah.
kind of separate entities. And I'm also not too familiar with how that works, but yeah, sorry, my computer was dying.
Like the Harvard Press and stuff like that.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
Harvard University Press, Princeton University Press, right? These are all it's a very different kind of entity and work. All right, well, I think we're at the end of our time. If there are questions you're like, oh my goodness, I can't believe I didn't ask that question, or something like that, email them to me, and maybe I can buy Yvonne a cup of coffee one day and get her to share a little bit more insight into the world. But Yvonne, I'm so grateful. We're all so grateful, I think, for your time today. Whatever it is that brought each of these students here to today's conversation, the others who will watch this recording, I think we've learned so much. And I think more than anything else, I just want to commend you for your faithfulness, not to the publishing world. I don't think that's what I want to commend you for. I want to commend you for your faithfulness to the word, both lowercase w and uppercase w, and a kind of passion to that. Um, I think your passion very much resonates with us today. It was infectious. And it says something that despite however many years you've been in the industry, right, that you can still convey this kind of emotion, however conflicted it is, right? However, it's been battered and beaten, and yet still there's a light and a flame there. And so thank you for your time. Thank you for your generosity. Thank you for your insight. We really appreciate it.
I really hope that all of you will pursue it in some capacity. I think, the mission of the word, of just keeping stories alive through writing, is the greatest privilege. And I'm thankful for the reminder of why it's important that we continue to pursue this. So thank you so much for having me. And it's so exciting to know that there are still writers and people who are dreaming about, contributing in these ways. So thank you guys. It was so nice
All
to meet you.
right. Yeah, follow the Grove Atlantic on Instagram, social media, and be on the lookout for new titles. I hope it's okay to send them your way to your LinkedIn account, Yvonne Cha,
Anything you
and
need.
yeah, and connect with her there. But thank you guys for coming today. Hope this was beneficial. I'll see you all soon. Jenna, go so good to see you. We'll have to catch up too. But thank you guys for being here today. And bye.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Yvonne, stick around for a second, okay?
Thank you so much.